Well, hello, it's Peter Cola again. Hello. And I hope you are joining us and subscribing. I am putting a lot of work into these videos, trying to bring the heal yourself for God's sake message, the message of uh, seeking the causes and not just the symptoms when treating people for illnesses, afflictions, diseases, infirmities, storms, attacks. Those different things. I've written a couple of books. Heal Yourself for God's Sake, available on Amazon. Also, I'll have a link down below where this is available. And the other book, that book there, the first one is, it is a conglomeration of my 35 years of practice. In the last 15, I have placed God into the healing process, treating people through body, mind, and spiritual means, and not just the physical, as in the body. In the second book, Quantum Ascension, this book is where I actually ask God, how is it done? Like I do with pretty much everything else, even when I treat patients. I ask that God, in each case, a small prayer, what's going on here? Enlighten me if there's something more going on than a simple physical issue. And he pretty much does every time. Quantum Ascension is a book that talks about how it works. How is it possible on a quantum level? Why the energy of our body has the ability to do things, spiritual things, that other energies, such as the chair or the window, does not. This particular video, oh, and by the way, I would shout out a little thank you to my good friend David Nino Rodriguez, who was going to come visit me this weekend, but he's actually going to maybe come maybe in a couple of weekends. Anyways, he is working his butt off to try to bring the news to you guys, to waken you guys up to the truth. And that's what I am doing too, from a more medical, from a more mind, body, and spiritual aspect, especially the spirit. And I do try to throw God into the scenario when I can. So that being said, but like I said, support Nino's Corner please, and the different things that he's in, especially Nino's Insiders, which my wife actually works with, Anna. So if you happen to join the Nino's Insiders, you might actually get a chance to talk to her. And if you want to contact me for direct application of what we do, or to ask me some questions, you can always email me at posture.is.everything@gmail.com. Also a link below. And you can answer, and I will try to answer your questions as best I can when I can get to them. I get a lot of emails. And you can even set up a time to call if you wish. And of course, if you know Charlie Ward, Simon, Mel, those people, Jacko, I really like to talk to them. I've been saying that for a long time, just because they have a lot of the same kind of things that I talk about, and I really like to meet other people of like minds and that I can chat with. Anyways, the name of this one is called Watch the Water. I ask how, what, and why we're told to watch the water. We are told to watch the water. Yet here in Arizona, on the weekend of the president comes for the rally, floods, storms, flash floods, even tornadoes, when we barely get any rain whatsoever for the whole rest of the year. In this ever-increasing chaotic world of hidden agendas, dark spiritual plots hiding under our beds, or lurking from the deep, dark recesses of those infinitely diabolical closets that we all must know reside one or another. The white-faced clown is in there, that little plastic Chucky doll, or some pathetic article of dried-up material, some old Hillary turd, or worse yet, the skinny-armed little Woody doll with the Tom Hanks voice, looking for the next baby to snatch, just hiding there, its head ready to swivel, to torment, unleashing at any moment as the inevitable results in the undeniable monstrous fear of some doomsday curse thought up in the minds of one another Nazi doctor. the perpetuated by the stumbling spasms of mindless zombies marching forward by their orders of these witches that seem to be subject to, we all know, there must be a way to obtain a higher ground, an elevated level of perspective. There must be a way to come above this, see it for what it is, overcome. That's what we do. We fight, we see it for what it is, turn the light on it, and overcome. We are overcomers. We all know there must be a way to obtain a higher ground, an elevated level of perspective, even a higher state of vibration. Talk about that in my Quantum Ascension book, where we can see clearly these pontifications of more than the ramblings of some plastic-headed shit-stuffed puppet, waiting obediently wait until their string is once again pulled. Here again, we are told, watch the water. As we have discussed in the last blog and subsequent videos that have followed, watching the water, especially when said water event is from God, has a distinct differential of perspective as well as expected outcomes depending on which team we happen to be following. We talked about that last time. Armchairing in your weekend rah-rah support, weekend quarterbacks in their chair, or if you happen to be actually one of those fighting on the front lines in this end times war between good and evil, if you believe such a thing, regardless for which side, the physical ramifications are always intensified by the spiritual energies that drive them, good or bad. And when we realize this is our own rising above them, regardless of the intensity of said storms, attacks, or curses, becomes a dance of the illumination, where everything looks small, inconsequential, and basically harmless, especially when viewed from orbit, that high up. But how do we get there? Unless we're, I don't know what his name is, that guy with the beard, I guess, with the shot up in the penis-shaped rocket. What an idiot. Anyways, and then has the audacity to thank us for providing it for him. So, and when we realize this is our own rising above them, regardless of the intensity of said storms, attacks, or curses, becomes the dance of illumination, where everything looks small, inconsequential, and basically harmless, especially when viewed from orbit. I just said that. But how do we get there to this lofty, apparently peaceful vantage point? That's the million-dollar question. Yeah, that's the one everyone seems to be pointing their fingers at the dark, ominous funnel cloud forming off in the distance, without giving some sound advice. What beanstalk will allow you to climb high above the clouds and safe from the ravishing effects of the swirling whirlwind down in the cornfield we happen to be lost in? Again, here we are, as many who have read my blogs or happen to glance at a chapter or two of the books I've written would tell you I commonly reveal when I don't know something or understand, especially the more subtle nuances of the spiritual side of things. I will go to the source of the spiritual illumination and revelations. The source. Asking God, you said we have not because we ask not. So I'm asking. Remember, I wear that one out. When we are told to watch the water, how exactly are we supposed to do this? Then I sit quietly in the solitude of my most recent prayer, waiting softly in what I've come to know as my own green pasture or still waters. And usually if I actually take the time to do these most important tasks, or at least try to, he will usually give me one or another image, sign, word, or bulletin casually dropped onto my awareness like some subtlety of any baseball landing on the top of your head as I casually sit and read. I sit and really not watch the game at all, paying more attention to the beauty next to me or the popcorn or beer I'm so desperately trying to, and I might say ungracefully, toss into my mouth, down my shirt, and all over the floor of the bleachers I happen to be sitting in. But in this particular case, all of the distractions mentioned above, as well as the impending visit from my dear Nina, were placed on short hiatus, allowing me more of a truly relaxed and reflective meditation. one any truly heartfelt prayer deserves. And in usual fashion, the father did not delay in depositing immediately the solid and very vivid image into my head, answering in one simple swoop all the questions I had been asking for quite a while about the water watching assignment. I say image because that is exactly how it seems to come to me more often than not. People who know me know I've always been an artistic at drawing and painting, unless I'm able to see the image in my head. When I don't have something sitting right in front of my image is frozen still so I can take the time to reproduce it on blank canvas. I cannot produce it merely out of my own imagination. It's not much different than in the written word. I get these glimpses in my head, whether it's stories or people, medical issues they bring to me, or situations, images, sometimes words, and then just write them down as best as I can, the way I see them. Call it intuition, or some people say vibration emanating from some rock or center of the galaxy. I believe it actually comes from God. Most of the time, because in many cases, it's not something that I have heard before, seen, or experienced. And when it comes to real solutions or insights, well, I'm just not that smart, or certainly wouldn't have done as many boneheads as I have in the past if I was. So, using more of the formal artistic liberties, I then try to not only speak of the primary focused subject, but strive to describe all the aspects of the issues or image at hand, which includes the background images or aspects surrounding seemingly unrelated factors, which might yet play a role in the entire composition, highlights, lowlights, focal points, and even specific directions in such as the light may be emanating from, and then how these play into perspective, allowing the then observer or witness for themselves to see what I see. Well, that's how it works, at least for me. And if you ask my wife, you would come to find out that God speaks to her in a slightly different and more often exciting way. Signs, colors, images that themselves translate into the meanings due to information she has realized are associated with these signs and the specific meanings behind them, even if a rudimentary yet always vivid and well specific and always constant. I think God talks to each of us in our own unique way. It is up to us to take the time out of our busy schedules, look at Him, recognizing Him in these energetic vibrational experiences, listen and watch, and then act upon the signs in a way that is pleasing to Him who gave us the information in the first place. So here you have it, a simple question about watching the water, how and what, and your inquisitive, new, not so young, bald friend getting the answer, or at least an image of the answer, that will in no doubt need to be placed to pen before the full and masterful painting has any chance of appearing. An image, in this case, an image of Jesus, and perhaps someone of less saintly attire, the then fisherman Peter walking on water. That's the image that popped into my head, very brief and just there. Standing above the waves and churning dark seas, unconcerned, unencumbered by what's going on below their feet. It was then I hear and just know as a clear and resolute voice appears in my head like the after rumblings of thunder just following a lightning strike of the neighbor's tree, only feet from the now shaking house I happen to be sleeping in. Weathering out the storm in what I know must be securely safe, secure location. I showed you this before, he says. Before anything else, do you remember? Way back then, he said. Didn't say it in those words. I just kind of heard that in my head somehow. The voice seems to ask without actually seeming to expect an answer. And while I seem to muster as much of a response as I could, of course I do. Very quickly, the rest of the image plays across my mind like a kaleidoscope, dancing images of image after image, flowing one after another, with so much action it would put the end times battle, the end games battle of Marvel movie, to shame in comparison, trying to even in the most childish eyes to make corresponding connections to all of these images, let alone remember them all. That being said, here you have it, dear friends, readers, fellow foxhole dwellers, and would-be water walkers. Images appear high above the storm, suddenly as massive as the great hurricanes, even cyclones, So first I see this image of Peter standing on the water very quickly, boom. And suddenly I have this image of being way above a cyclone or a hurricane. Huge cyclones are bigger than hurricanes, apparently, in the South Pacific. Massive, has great hurricanes, even cyclones, but massive clouds. When seen from this vantage point way above, these winds, which I know must be in the 100 to 200 mile an hour range, hardly seem to be moving in the least. Lightning strikes happening all over the area of the great storm merely look like small flashes of light, no brighter than most of those fireflies of my youth that used to just come on and come off out in the yard. I enjoy looking outside in the yard and the gentle, soft summer eve. Even the power of a great tornado. Next image. When observed from high above, the storm that fuels them leaves the observer with absolute assurance that the raging destructive force below has no chance of even touching them as they watch out the storm and watch from above. Then suddenly I'm hoisted up into a mountaintop where I can see my own dear city Phoenix. Below, in the telltale smog line that often rests upon the city, especially on days when the overall heat seems to press this pollution down into the valley below, coupled with the eerie stillness of no breeze. A layer of darkness rests so thick on the tops of the buildings or peaks in the center of town. It's only those that actually judder through this cloud line. They are all that poke at still gasping heads out of this struggling, almost chokingly like, to breathe of somewhat fresher air. How strange it is when you are living in it. The smog slowly being cooked in the water like some frog, and water being turned on slowly in heat. You hardly notice this reduced, almost dismal hue around you. The only factor is the steadily increasing of pulmonary irritation that seems to occur in almost everybody. Increased allergies, all that stuff. And the increased allergies is just about what they say. It's the gluten. Just blame the gluten. So must it be with any storms, attacks, pollutions, pollutants, diseases. If you can't even see the streets of the ground below, the haze, how can you possibly have any chance of seeing the hordes attacking the demon troops marching on the people below in the valley? Interesting enough, when you are flying directly over, as with an airplane or a hot air balloon, you can clearly see, quite clearly below, everything going on there. Now suddenly it looks no more threatening or significant, for that matter, than watching little ants moving about they're playing in the patios below, gathering their little crumbs or going about their tasks they themselves deem essential, literally unaware of the observer above. More importantly, have absolutely no chance to elicit even the vaguest influence on now that skywalker who's floating in the air above them. So there you have it. Simple as it might seem, all you have to do is rise above it. Rise above it. Walk on water. When in the storm, climb out of the valley before the pollution sucks you into its dark black maw. Walk on the water. Now that sounds easy. One guy in history managed to do it other than Jesus, and he happened to need to lock eyeballs with him to do it. But here you go. There again, did the man himself say, even greater things than those you saw me do, you will do, because I'm with my Father in heaven. He did say that. Greater things than he, and he walked on water. Does that mean we can walk on water too? He did say greater things. I wrote about a related topic quite a while ago, placing it in my Quantum Ascension book, but I think it might be appropriate for this time to bring it out and read it, called The Descended. A father, a brother, a son is going about his business. He has heard a commotion, people talking about the show at the temple. But people always talk. Maybe he should see it for himself. There are fish to catch. He has children to feed. Not that he has a difficult life, although work can be hard. With good work comes good rewards. Seeing the faces of his children as they smile at the dinner table, a meal provided by strength of his arm, the commitment of his work, the love of a father who loves the lives that he has been placed in his care. and worth every physical discomfort the efforts may produce, making it worthwhile. The father walks not far from his house, contemplating as he goes the spectacle of the show of the temple has become, recalling to himself thoughts, veiled whispers of vague memories in his life in front of him. I've heard that what they say, the dancing, the music, people go in and then don't come out for long hours at a time. My wife says it's gotten out of hand. People lose themselves there like slaves or addicts. I don't see how that could possibly be, he says to himself silently. All I know, it seems to scare her, what she's heard, the darker side of what others merely call entertainment. Her words are a warning, soft echo in his head. Stay away from there, nothing good will come from that place. Ridiculous as it may seem, ghost stories, monsters under the bed, witches dancing in the groves up in the hills, these fairy tales never seemed to scare him, even in his youth. Perhaps that was one benefit of being born with a strong arm, completely confident he could take care of himself. Plus, the curiosity has always been his weakness of his not necessarily. Plus, curiosity has always been a weakness of his, not necessarily limited to the comings and goings of cats. Here's the cats again. The beautiful sparkling of children of the eyes of his children. He can't help but notice his sons walking along by his feet. How he loves playing on the ground, playing with him, or picking up his daughter, holding his children close to his chest. How beautiful they are! It is so easy to see his wife's eyes in them. The purity of the child's smile tickles his memory for the days of his youth. The sweet smile of his wife on their wedding day. Each day is another nugget of gold. So beautiful God has given him every single day of his adult life. Thoughts cascade with each step in the moment through the years of highlights as he strokes the path along this seemingly darkening road. There is an air of restlessness ahead, voices, even screams, seeming sirens in the wind. Is that pleasure or pain he hears, dancing among the many busy thoroughfares he passes these days? His earlier years were less complicated than those. The pressures of responsibility were only just beginning to shine their light through the morning trees. A man only had to think of himself in those early hours, care for himself, work enough to feed himself. But the joy of a wife does bring its own comforts, contemplations, and added tasks. Work for food, build a house, raise enough for a harvest, fill enough with the fish with the nets one has, carve or sand enough wood for another, save to maybe buy a boat, all to take care of the family he both wanted. How funny life will change one step at a time. A brick here, a table there, a baby's bottle, child's clothes, bedding, shoes, food. Oh, but it's worth it to watch his children eat and grow. A man wonders to himself if everybody feels this way, but I certainly have seen the pleasures of my labors, the gifts of love given him by an adoring wife, and loving children that count on us to provide all we need, all they need, place them on the right path in this life, but who really gave them these gifts? For only within the source of such perfection could a masterpiece of such magnificence spring. These precious lives kept in our care, brought under our responsibility of my wife and my protection until they are old enough to make decisions for themselves. It's a great responsibility. Their lives' growth, even health, is determined by the choices we make. The work, the very ground a man tills until they come to the day of accountability. He remembers his own ceremony, that wonderful bar mitzvah, how he looked forward to as a child himself, the thought of finally being old enough to make his own decisions, being responsible for himself. It seemed so freeing of thought then. How little did he know that moving into adulthood brought with it not only the accountability of self, but the responsibility of everyone else who comes under your care. I just don't see what all the excitement's about. Watching the priests and priestesses carry it on, his mind suddenly goes back to what he was as he's walking down the street. He suddenly finishes saying to himself as he walks up closer to the building, now clearly displaying everything out in the steps and even into the streets, open for all to see. The temple he was speaking of is the newly built temple for Moloch. And while he heard of this religion, if he could call it that, it has been around for centuries. It is only recently that these structures have come into sight. The king today seems more tolerant to such practices than in the past. Even seems to be encouraging it, this carrying on. Otherwise, why would they build so many temples? People come and stare for hours at the performances, spectacles for all to see. Priests engaged in all sorts of shows, demonstrating, even practicing themselves in the very act of vile vice, war mimicking, dances, or death acts imaginable. Many things only years ago would have been considered intolerable are now being seen or even displayed to the docile, cheering crowd. Priestesses, the most beautiful in the land, voluptuous beyond belief, openly flaunt nudity with lust-filled eyes, calling out other men and women, luring them with their gestures. They are all adorned with these strange symbols, pictures painted on their skins or jewelry dangling from pierced faces, markings that what seem to be sinisterly resonate with dark meanings of their own just beyond the limits of one's awareness. Men of strength and stature display themselves with smirks across their faces, clearly displaying the pride they have for themselves as they taunt others with their sweat-drenched gestures, performing their mimic violence of war or aggression. Even fighting displays with such ferocity is difficult to see if it's real or merely an act. Eunuchs whose exact sexual origin is not exactly clear to determine, engage in all sort of manner of sexual perversion with each other. The more flamboyant, the better, desperate to bring attention to themselves. They even engage in horrible acts with animals. They, meaning all of the priestesses. The horrified, imprisoned creatures stare back at them in terror, these animals do, understanding somewhere in their beings that evil that seems to reside there. Many even dance against cold statues that seem to themselves lingering on the edge of some possible supernatural movement. The more shocking and degrading, the more blood involved. The more people's gaze memorized in wonder, stalk, stare, gawk, and cheer. In the center of is this huge bronze demonic statue image of Moloch, or is it Baal? I can't remember. The guy says to himself, the man says. It seems to be called many different things by many different people. A tall bronze creature with, with a horned cow's head that appears to have a human body, a rectangular cut out of its belly, revealing the constant hunger of the fire that sits within. It is a large, grotesque figure of envious imagery, the beast's image, with a hateful look on its face, not quite cow-like, almost devilish, cow-eyed, as clearly lacks any life or soul, only lingers in the lifeless stare, the black slits around its eyes reflecting only the darkness that no doubt dwells inside. Who does it hate? Seemingly everyone and everything, maybe itself. Increasingly, many of its events have the same ring in their noses or in their faces. Many of his people, comrades, priests, even seem to mimic the image they worship. Hands stretched out, reaching, wanting, ever more unsatisfied, and grasping for anything, everything to quench that ever-present hunger that burns within. The large rectangle cut out of his stomach is in the place they throw various sacrifices. Priests and priestesses cast various elements of precious wealth into the blazing chasm, screaming in combination of ecstasy and pain, searing pain from the burning tentacles that reach out and touch any and all that come near. The priest must fling the treasures into the hot belly because getting too close already had caused a few to spontaneously erupt into flame as their clothes, hair, or ornamental dressing catches fire, sending the unfortunate into a crumbling blaze of fire and screaming. This only seems to cause the attendants to laugh and dance more feverishly. The gape maw in the belly is never satisfied. The fire has caused the statue's skin to burn deeper red and hotter with every sacrifice. The tormented destruction of everything that is thrown in is evident from the gasp and radiating stares on the faces of all that stand and watch. Shadowy reflections of flames dance across the faces of the onlookers like small menacing spirits in an endless, chaotic rhythm across the cheeks, eyes, mouths. Many of the onlookers wear masks over their mouths, as do many of the subservient attendants. They are clearly not leading, but following this procession. The ever growing, constant fire within the heating of the creature, to the point of almost white hot, glowing, even pulsating, along with the now moving edges, seems to ripple with life of its own. Gyrating figures all around, enticing more and more onlookers. The spirit, some spirit into the crowd of onlookers, only to pull reluctant participants before the statue. Mostly these are young children or young women that are pulled out of the crowd alone. Often nobody helps them as they are pulled away from the gasping horror. In gasping horror, many tossed in horror and screams into the burning blaze. A few sliced open to draw out their blood before their now dead body is tossed into the chasm, or worse yet, sliced and devoured by the leaders of this performance. The majority of them, their screaming and crying drowned by the chanting tones of all the onlookers, is resistant is resistance as resistance fades from the ear as they are drug across the square by the priestesses, even pushed by the others in the crowd, people of all ages, status, standing, sitting, kneeling, even bowing low in front of the image, watch in a sort of trance, maybe a transhuman staring for hours upon end, waiting for yet again another tingle in their emotional base to spark, most of them on all fours. It is truly the earth that they have now been fallen into its grip. One would say transhuman because their spirits, especially at the front, can in no way be only their own. The most popular and beautiful are solicited in service as priests and priestesses. This service is not without compensation or costs. They receive the highest pay in the land, nearly rivaling the king. Their every want and desires are fulfilled, power, pleasure, and even prestige given them by the bronze statue, or so they think. But to the costs they pay with their servitude, it's a service for life, a blood contract for the very soul once signed. They no longer have access to. Only death can separate them from the service once they've entered. Every bit of purity, beauty, strength is slowly sucked out of them until only a dried up husk of shell remains. All of their symbols, their demonstrations, even the words being uttered, are not their own. Everyone seems to know the true source of the chanting. As a result, their every movement seems watched by and scrutinized by the leaders, for they must always conform to the behavioral dictated by the temple, or their position will be eliminated, outcast, or worse yet, find themselves on the sacrificing table themselves. A sacrifice for sexual mutilation, for the visual pleasures of the gawking crowd. They, of course, must perform as they were instructed, whether they believe it in the ritual or not. They have paid with their souls. It is no longer their choice. For they must bow down and confess that with their mouths the lies that the head priest instructs them. The priest or priestesses give all their bodies, hearts, and minds to this image. The very act they eroticize are designed to draw the onlookers in with every sight, sound, and movement. The rituals and potions that they must ingest have the severest consequences on these young bodies, beautiful bodies, marking them forever inside and out. Age and stress wears them before their time, and only when the beauty of youth seems to have left are they discarded, penniless, without concerns of ceremony. The growing crowds of onlookers who worship them with their eyes, ears, hearts, and time, long to engage them, mimic them, even touch one of them for the lust and acts they impress into their audience's souls. These seem to be repeated rhythms to show as presented. The underlying negative message hidden deep within the symbolism passed in front of the eyes of the onlookers Messages hidden repeatedly created almost undetectable small scars in the memories of everybody watching. People have no idea that they're being manipulated. Memories and images locked away with the deepest chambers of their minds, recesses, hidden doors to secret rooms that the priests can later use when the time is right. The priestesses rush into the crowd and pull screaming baby from the clutches of its horrified mother. Others in the crowd hold the mother back as the priestess now brings the now flailing and desperate, horrified child up to the now red hot, outstretched hands of the statue. She holds the infant up between the glowing hands, clearly burning herself in the process. A man stands off to the side, gripping his small child's hand, our man, while part of him is pulling to rush to the rescue of the child in the witch's grip. Yet the other part remains fast as fear for his own child keeps him from acting. As the child scream, as the screams of the child, so desperate as also the mothers in the crowd, as well as many onlookers, reach a crescendo, the priestess turns and places the now dying child into the burning hand of the demon. The very act seems to take the remaining strength from the priestess as she collapses herself between the searing hands of the idol. No one steps up to help her, as she is also begins to smolder, igniting into flame from the heat. A man turns to leave, his stomach already convulsing at the sight he just witnessed, suddenly jerked to stop as he feels his own young son being pulled back out of his grip by another priestess. A second and even third priestess now grab the now screaming child and pull as the man thrashes, desperately gripping the hand of his child only with his one hand because the rest of his body is being restrained by the multitude of onlookers around him, not allowing even him hardly to turn or flee his other arm to help. Even as he feels his child's hand slip from his own now sweat-drenched grip, so does his thoughts fade slowly into insanity. As darkness descends its veil upon the mind of our man, and the devastating realization of what is coming, fear and dread, constrict themselves. Somewhere in his chest, everything fades to black. Now, 2020 years later, a simple man sits at his desk and has a vision of a similar man to himself, working through his daily task unabated by the constant drum of everything around him. He glances up at the TV, mesmerized by the beauty and eroticism displayed there, unaware of the symbols dangling from the ears or displayed from the gowns, because his attention is not on the patterns of the dress, but on the skin lying just below. Images of actors engaged in all sorts of shows demonstrating every act of vile vice, war, death imaginable. Actresses, the most beautiful, the voluptuous beyond belief, with men of strength and stature, engaged in all manner of sexual perversion. Men who look like women and women doctored up to look like men, all speak in tones or emotions that seem to just make him feel uncomfortable. The more shocking and degrading, the more people around him, the unseen audience, gaze and wonder, stare, gawk, and cheer. I see our family man being brought to the image by his friends at first, then later just coming to it as on his own, sitting more and more in front of the image, staring into the rectangle of wonder. The rituals unfold before him. He is hardly noticing the gradual deterioration of events playing out before his eyes. The increasing image of fire, blood, and abuse of women and children being displayed. The programs seem to descend into deeper violent vice every day. Even sporting contests he liked to watch are themselves becoming increasingly violent and angry. Images continue to ever amplified in volume and intensity, brighter and more realistic, louder and longer. The same themes playing out on every channel long into the night. When did they all start dancing with each other naked? When did it become acceptable for the strong to abuse and rape the weak? When did the cursing just flow like filth through the open sewer ditches of people's mouths? When did the thief, the murderer, the child abuser, the criminal, the demon, Lucifer himself become the hero? When animals were suddenly cruelly tormented and put to death for all to see, women brutalized to the cheer and ecstasy of onlookers, Children victimized at the very hands of other children. People didn't even seem to notice the digression. When onlookers give up family, love, jobs, life to sit there and worship, place their gold at the temple feet of these that these images provide, the transition was hardly noticeable. When people start burning the self with the white hot hands of their God, it gives the onlooker an almost sexual feeling while watching the pain it solicits. The audience almost erupts in orgasmic ecstasy with each ever increasing act of human destruction. Crying for more, they will pay anything, their last coin, their pound of flesh for one more moment of increasing perversion. The most powerful of the land have become now the slaves to blood, as much, if not more, than those who perform these acts. The priests, the the players, the leaders, the bankers constantly call for more and more. But there is no satisfaction granted to the actor's plea because there's no quenching the hungering fire that burns within Moloch. Or was it Baal? I don't remember. So common is the burning of flesh, sacrificing of beauty, sexual perversion. It can hardly has an effect on the onlookers any longer. The degradation continues, priests having sex with men, actresses with women, so common that it has almost become the norm, almost preferred instead of the exception. Children are solicited at gradually younger age, first against their will, and then later willingly, until the point where even babies are not safe from the clutches of this ritual. Actresses throwing their faces into the fire, witches wearing masks, laying prostrate naked across the image's hands, convulsing in burning pain with screams of delight. Actors wearing masks, sacrificing their body, even their entire body, willfully against white-hot images, knowing the flesh is destined to be burned and only disfigurement awaits. Finally, the high priest turns to his audience and says, Moloch demands it. You give us your families. No, you give us your children now because the time has come and strong is he. The priestesses are first to place their screaming babies in the hands of this hellish demon. Men riding on the backs of the demon ball, fling the crowns off their heads and shriek in terrorizing delight. One after another gives their own children to the clutches of the actors or priestesses as they rip them from less loving hands. There's no safety, no kindness, no compassion, just an ever-present hunger and lust to take the young lives and use them. Put Moloch in every room, the high priest screams, and men rush off to obey. Lay your children in front of him, the priestess demands, and watch the fire devour the virgin flesh, she screams with her witch's shrill voice. A wife comes to our man, pleading for him to come home, take his eyes away from the hypnosis that has gripped his mind, and come back to her family, their home that has fallen apart from lack of care. Our man no longer has time. He barely has time to function. His service to family is in direct proportion to his interest in the events away from his gaze. And right now, he is 100% in front of the image as soon as possible. Sit there in euphoric coma all day, even fall asleep in front of it. He worships it. His children that used to play at his feet, climb on his lap, nestle at his chest, come less and less each day because all he does is push them away. One day they stop coming altogether, and eventually his wife stops coming as well, never even bothering to call him to dinner. He is not alone. Many have jumped into the fray, even screaming with ecstasy as they lay their babies on the burning white hands of this filthy demon, putting them in front of merciless hot flames, any and all purity burned from them. Screaming in pain, the sweet innocent child cries are not only drowned out by the louder insane screams of the lusting onlookers, one after another cast into the fiery maw of this filthy beast, now black with the soot of many innocent victims within. Baby after innocent baby is thrown in without care or concern. The screams of the onlookers, why do they care? As long as these children don't interfere with their fun. So dark is the heart of Moloch, so crafty is the spider Baal, large in his web, yet all black as soot. He hardly feels it as his daughter is taken by the images she watches in the solace of her own room. The grips of many witches clasp her hands as they pull her mind into shadowy realm of darkened spellcraft. Some Sure, they promised her popularity, beauty, even love. They know full well none of these are theirs to give. Suddenly, screams are heard by the parents only feet down the hall as the father is finally pulled away from his stupor and dashes away from the images just to meet the closed door and demonic screams issuing from his sweet daughter's room. He's a big man, made large not only by his own indulgences, but by the years of heavy labor he has performed. He has always trusted the strength of his arms to solve any problem he might encounter. He slams against the locked door multiple times, while it should have easily yielded something more powerful than himself is barring his way. Suddenly, the demonic growls cease, as well as his daughter's weeping voice, and the door just swings open before him. Both his wife and he almost stare in sudden shock as the door opens by its own will. The man steps through, even while gripped from behind his wife, and only manages to reach out a single hand to take what appears to be his daughter's hand in his own. She has become more an animal than a human, sitting on the ground, eyes staring forward in some horrific trance, looking more like a jackal than a daughter he knew only moments before. As she tries to pull her own hand away from his now tear-drenched hand, her strength has become uncontrollable, the grip sliding through his own as a shadowing veil descended upon his mind. And almost constriction seems to be occurring where his heart was, and he himself slips into darkness and insanity. Gone forever, the beautiful brown eyes of his child. Our poor man stares into the dark, foolish loneliness. So dark is our own man's heart become, black as soot. What about him who by our own indulgences has left has been left behind? The leaves and grasses is now the grasses is not the leaves and grasses now withered and gray, unaware of the autumn storm or the lost journey may sway. What about those whom by choice and foolish amend went the wrong way and willfully descend, fall into the crevasse or into the sewer's distress, only to find themselves being carried away into dark filth, dismay, and death's recess? Not a death of resurrection as seen from above, a new life of winged flight and heavenly life, light and love, but death of destruction where no new life can be found, merely a disintegration of hope. With its reintegration into soil, they are bound. God, I do pray for all those who have been deceived by the spirit of this demon, and I pray that not only will the people who have been captured into its service of this dark temple lift their heads and have their eyes open, but you will also grant them the wisdom and how they can bring the fight right to the enemy's camp with an influx of your spirit, your will, and your actions. Let us turn from slaves of great warriors to great warriors of Christ and take back the venues meant to enslave us, your people turning it into a great weapon in the army of Christ. Walking on water, climbing out of the valley, seeing an attack from elevated eyes, whether sickness or storms, attacks of any kind, pollutants or curses, betrayals or lies. These are all the same negative energies being inflicted upon created physicalities, subtle in their changes, their ill-intended derangements of malevolence intentions with dark spiritual abilities. For it is through seeking of truths and making them our own, that we climb one step at a time out of the valley, up the mountain, the path from even before this universe began to be known. We can take the hard way, which is so often a climb, a meandering, deviating path, a crawl, but we can also take the fast track by lifting our heads to Him, locking eyes in His, our eyes in His, reaching out in childlike wonder, in hope, in bliss. And he is never too far off, too busy to hear when we call out to him with our questions, our hopes, our prayers, our fear. So that's it for today, my friends. I wanted to get this word to you. Walking on water is nothing, is not an easy task, but it's a simple task. It's merely one of looking to God and asking. And he will lift you up above any attack, any storm, it doesn't matter. You just ask him to lift you up and see it for what it really is. And as you see it for what it is, your vision upon this attack drives away the darkness and only leaves the physical behind. We're going to get into that one more the next time, in the next lesson. Well, again, this is Peter Cola. I'm working with Nino a little bit. I do some writing for him. He does publish my stuff occasionally. And like I said, you can get my book. We don't monetize, so this is our only way of, we self-publish. So it would be nice if you bought a copy. If you're a Nino Insider, you can email me at posture.is.everything, and I will give you a discount. Plus, I'll send you a signed copy. So, that being said, available at Amazon. Heal yourself, for God's sake. As soon as I find a new publisher, I've got other books to publish, but I'm not going to publish those on Amazon. I'm going to find a new publisher. So if you know somebody, let me know. Quantum Ascension. Yep, available. Thank you. Love you guys and hope to hear from you. Please comment or approve or thumbs up or whatever they do. And I definitely hope that you will join our team, whatever they do. Subscribe, and share these videos with other people, please. As many as you want. You can share them as much or republish them. I don't care. Love you. Take care and bless you.